in the Discord here. I feel like that's
I think it does that automatically. Actually,
oh,
I think I've already just gotten out everyone. Yep.
okay. GM.
Howdy. But maybe somebody can tell us how our mic levels are. I can only hear you guys. You guys sound pretty similar in volume.
Sounds pretty good.
Mic level's good. Okay, nice. Sarge and Fall. I think you guys can just hop up. I don't know if... Yeah, nice. Hello there.
Good morning.
It really is morning for you. Got up bright and early for this.
Hey, can you hear me, Cold?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I think this is all of us from the Echelon side that are hopping up. Maybe we can give a couple more minutes for people to trickle in. Meta, we got a question for you in general.
Based. I love Wendy's. Wendy's probably number 2. I think McDonald's still is tops.
Wendy's fries are good. Their fries are good.
I think McDonald's fries are.
Well, McDonald's fries are god tier, but
Yeah.
Wendy's fries are pretty good. I think they like batter them or something. There's like a crust on them that's not natural.
So my friend as a kid would instead of getting the Coke or the pop with the Wendy's, he'd get the Frosty, and he would dunk his fries in the Frosty. I thought he was really weird. I don't know if that's normal for everyone else.
I'm about it.
I'm not that's not my thing. I think that's more of like I think dunking fries in like milkshakes is more of an American thing. For some reason, that's how it's depicted in like movies. I never really was taught to do that.
I'm amazed that there's a conversation about fast food going on and we haven't been talking about A&W. Like those
I think A&W is overrated. I think I like it. I love the pop, but I think the burger and fries is
Yeah, the frosted glass is a nice touch, but
I
never
love
really.
that.
Oh, we're throwing down. We're throwing down. Nothing tops an A&W burger. Oh my goodness, they're perfect.
Wow.
We have everyone we need to get going here.
Get going. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can.
I can't believe I just said that. That was awkward. Sorry.
All right. Well, let's get started. So thanks everyone for joining us on again another Sunday. We have Ultra here. I don't know if Ultra wants to pop up. Anyways, yes, thanks for joining us. I think we released the bulletin out on, I think it was Thursday there, and we've heard some feedback, and I guess like we want to sort of talk through and work through the items with everyone. So I think the first thing we want to sort of come out and say is like, we apologize for sort of how the communication may have read. We're still trying to find that balance between like sort of speed of delivery and communication. And these bulletins were sort of meant to be sort of brief and to get the information out there, and this is to avoid the sort of 20 plus page documentation that we used to issue. And so there's a balance there with sort of trying to get the information out, but also, keeping the context for the community calls like we have today. But looking back, we sort of recognize that there's probably a need to provide more context for some of the topics, and I think moving forward we will sort of make these bulletins a bit more beefier to provide some clarity on some of the items. And also recognizing that like these are sort of works in progress that are to be discussed. I think we'll also add sort of disclaimers on these bulletins for that, and sort of make it very clear that the role of the bulletin. I think also we want to improve sort of conversations within the community with more focused topics in a more open forum town hall format. So with this, we want to sort of announce that like on Wednesday of this week around noon or at noon, we want to open the floor to everyone to come on stage and discuss the Prime unlock and hear opinions on how it can be done. This will not be the only discussion in the Prime unlock, but this will be the first one. So we'll schedule another open forum for this Wednesday. So if you have an opinion or you have an idea of how the Prime unlock should roll out, please come and provide some feedback. The second topic would be Ardent Prime. So the Ardent Prime was always meant to be to reward a faithful collector base, and wasn't meant to reward only the rich. It was supposed to be non-gameable and recognize collectors outside of quality and quantity, because we already have an existing rewards program that does that, which is Prime events and caching. So those that have collected on the basis of quality and quantity have received Prime proportionally. So when we revisited the example of the 5-tier system, we felt that it maybe was too heavy on the top end, which is why we sort of flattened it to a two-tier system. But the feedback we received over the last couple of days that we may have over flattened, and that we should consider revisiting the tier amounts. The third item I'll pass over to Cold, sort of pertaining to EP continuity.
Yeah, so the other item that people raised from the bulletin was this concept of taking away the rule that every other year an EP would have to run in the general election. So, and the other thing as well was a little bit of an oversight in terms of language, because we had shared that the internal election would always be made up of a minority of the group of EPs. So rightly, some people identified, well, hey, doesn't that mean that there could be 5 EPs internally elected if there are 11? So we're gonna clarify that to say it will always be capped at 4, and it will make up a minority. And out of context, that doesn't make too much sense, but we were changing that wording, thinking that in the future the number of EPs may change. So if there were 9 EPs, then it would be a maximum of 4. If there are 7 EPs, it would be a maximum of 3. If there are 20 EPs, it would be a maximum of 9. I think my math is correct there. So that was that component. And then the reason for removing the part about every other year EPs need to be internally elected is that when we thought about it, we realized it kind of raises a bad incentive, because there could be a situation where, let's say that only you hope that this situation never takes place, but there could be a situation where only a small group of EPs are doing their job, say, and the way that it's currently worded means that like let's say theoretically there are only like 2 EPs that were doing their job and everybody else was not showing up to meetings, and not doing what they're supposed to. With the way it's worded right now, Echelon would have to choose 3 or 4, whatever the minority is, of those EPs. And the issue that raises is that you're essentially having to select from a group that, were there not an internal election, wouldn't get elected, and if they were to run in the general election, they wouldn't get elected. But it forces Echelon to have to elect a group of people that might be underperforming. So you hope that that situation never takes place, but it would not be ideal if it did. So with that said, we recognize that there probably still does need to be a change, and we'll talk about that in a bit.
So do we want to hear from the community at this point? Is that the next like logical step now that we've laid these things out?
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
if anyone wants to come on board or sort of write out some messages in the let's use the voice text channel, and we can read them out. Looks like Nain is ready. I will. Can someone let him on stage? I'm not sure how I do that.
I hit a button that looks like it allowed him on stage. There we
Oh,
go.
there we go.
Nate, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me fine?
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, and thank you for setting up the call. Thank you for the context. I will try to be concise. I understand there are many people, and they may want to share their concerns. And we've kind of also flooded the chat with a lot of concerns and questions. So I think there's not a lot of fruit going into the context so much. So I'll kind of get straight to my concerns regarding both the topics. I think I'll start with the internal elections first. So the proposed amendment to the internal election process, I have made a note of the what Cole said in the end, and I will also kind of come to that by the end. But I'll start from the first point that I have. So I understand it was a draft. I understand that there's a need for continuity, and I understand the draft is a suggestion. I don't think that the concern is there, and I don't think the concern ends there. I talked to a lot of people, and even if I dismiss my own view, I think not one single person said that this is a great move, that it sounds really good, it sounds like a leap forward. I think the least critical thing that people have said is, let's hear them out. I think that tells you that there's something wrong here. I think that tells you that there's friction here, right? I think that is very telling in itself about the choice. It's not about the fact that it's a draft. It's the fact that what came up. What did you suggest? I think as EPs, what Echelon suggested was something that I don't think naturally anybody said it's a good step forward. And I think that should flag it. Sorry. So the fact that EPs thought that this was a good idea, I think suggests that there are bigger problems here. Mostly, I think that of weak communication. And what was the justification for such a change, for example, especially after the fact that the actual internal elections proposal resulted in some reservation. People did express some reservations, but we understand that, okay, we're talking about continuity. We understood that not reducing this rollover will help move things along. We understood this. But this process was changed twice without even any trial. Like this not even put to trial. Nothing has happened. There's no data to suggest that it works or it doesn't work. And then coming out with a second, rather aggressive change, I think it shows a lack of understanding of community sentiment at best and a blatant disregard of it at worst. I mean, it can't be disputed that communication left a lot to be desired. And I agree that this does read wrong, but I don't think the responsibility should be placed on the mode or the method or the wording of the communication. I think the responsibility should be on what came up and why was there such a disconnect with what the community clearly feels. And I'll come to what Cole said. So Cole, you said that people not doing their jobs, EPs not showing up to meetings, and all of those things. So why don't we make it more transparent? Why does it have to be so opaque? How does any EP intend to get elected if they don't work? Clearly, there should be more transparency. Like, for example, I'm not here to just complain. I mean, why not evaluate your peers? Why don't we have this internal evaluation every 3 months? And then you can share the results of those evaluations with the community. Let the people who are affected, the EPs who are affected by those scores, let them defend themselves. Let them tell the community what they've been doing. I mean, after this whole year, how are people supposed to vote for the EPs? How do we know what anybody's done if this is the case? If internally you guys are concerned that people are not doing their jobs, how are we supposed to vote for them? I think this is like a no-brainer. I think, and the fact that also over the year, I think we've heard from maybe a handful of EPs at best. Why is that the case? I think that should be answered. I think why don't we hear from more EPs? Why is there, like I said, this lack of communication? And if it is because if they're not doing their job, and it seems to be that was the case, because if they were doing their jobs, it seems that this clause would not have come out. It seems that things wouldn't be this way. So clearly, some EPs have not been doing their job. Sadly, we never knew, and we don't get to know. So there is a need for more transparency here. It seems to be the case. And secondly, so these heavy-handed changes, they're very aggressive without any data. They're not backed by anything yet, and they come out clearly out of the blue for the community. And I feel like, so the two things that I'll kind of sum it down to: one, the communication and transparency in regards to EP performance as well. And secondly, how do we ensure that such aggressive changes are not going to happen at such a fast speed without even any reasoning given? How do we check that? How do we trust that these processes will not be changed again and again and again for whatever reason? So I'll stop here for you guys to kind of answer this. Thank you.
So I'll say on the note of communication, I think you're absolutely right. And there is a ton of work to be done there. At the start of the year, I think as a group, we're sort of learning what the role meant, and kind of there are some touchy topics like with Prime and stuff that we aren't fully at liberty to say everything about. However, I think that we are entering a phase now where everybody sort of knows what's up, and I would very much like to get into a cadence of much more regular communication, like even if that's just chilling on voice chat a couple times a week, kind of like how there is Breakfast Club over in Parallel, and just chatting it out. I definitely think that's a direction we can go. And in terms of more organized communication, the call that we're having on Wednesday about Prime Unlock is one example, but I think having more organized conversations like this on a more regular cadence is another thing we can do. So yeah, I definitely hear you on the lack of communication, and hopefully that can get better.
I think I'll add to the sort of, I guess, like the evaluations or the sort of like ongoing performance. I think this is sort of, Nan, you hit the nail on the head there. So I think we had talked about it, we just haven't implemented yet. Some sort of like rolling sort of assessment of performance that can be published to the community on a frequent basis. We haven't sort of figured out if that's on a monthly or quarterly, but we have discussed it. It's just we just aren't quite there yet. But I think that is exactly where we plan on going, and we just have to sort of work through that sort of process.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate that, but once again, I think I don't think the question was sufficiently answered. I mean, I'll come back to it again, and I don't want to waste time, like I said, but I do want to address this. I want it addressed. So the elections are coming up. it's been let's say 300 days. Nobody found time among the other EPs or generally also to talk to the community. One, I think that should be addressed. I mean, why was it the case that it was this way? And secondly, so with there being no kind of evaluation, nothing, how is the community expected to vote for the same people if they become candidates again? So, I mean, what did EPs think was going to be the mode here? How is the community supposed to know if somebody did their job or didn't do their job? And it's been a year. I mean, I understand we're learning. I understand that, but I also understand they've been 300 days. That's a lot of days to learn. I'm just wondering, like, and also if there have been people who haven't done their job, should that not be transparent? Should we not know who are the people who haven't done their job so we don't vote for them next time?
Yeah, maybe I can hop in here. So I think on the comment of it's been 300 days, I think there's been a lot of stuff in the background that the community isn't privy to that has to be done very carefully. That maybe it appears at times as though people aren't running down a million things to make progress, which is really the case in the background. I can attest to that. I think and I expected a good shellacking, Nain, so I appreciate it, and I appreciate your transparency. I know this is coming from a place of interest in ensuring that, one, we protect like the democratic nature of Echelon and Prime, as well as a number of other keen interests in the space. I think that the communication, I think there's definitely a takeaway here that that ideas can be socialized maybe more softly. But I don't think there's an inherent harm personally in the fact that this document is published to say, hey, here are the things we're discussing, because I think that's like fundamentally the function is the formal notification of the topic at hand. And I think that's how we approached it. But I think that obviously, what you're suggesting is, hey, can there be more soft, less formal conversations around some of these ideas? And I think at times the way we work as a group is kind of why this occurs is the byproduct of our conversations are, okay, let's stop talking about it as EPs, let's put something on paper. And then we put it on paper to say, hey, let's socialize this. And then it hits the community, and then the community can then feel like, oh, well, they already put it on paper, so it's like locked in. And I don't think that's the intention. I think there's inevitably going to be iteration required as kind of we realize there are different vulnerabilities or vectors that we need to cover off. So I wouldn't say that things are. I would expect for the next year or two to continue to see gaps get closed or items get raised that need to be addressed. But I think I wouldn't take personally, and this is just my recommendation, but I can understand where everyone's coming from if this is a public sentiment. I wouldn't take those documents as, oh, this is locked in, just too bad, so sad. It's more like, hey, this is an indication that the EPs are talking about this. There's clearly something here. Let's have a conversation with the community based on this documentation, and initiate the kind of deeper dive if needed, if there's something disagreeable about it, which I think in this case there is, and use that as a jumping off point. Because I think what can happen operationally on the Echelon side at times is we discuss things, it turns into a lot of discussion and not a lot of kind of communication and transfer of information to the community to broaden that discussion, and the ability to kind of document and publish more regularly, I think opens that up, and that's really the objective of why those documents get published. But that's not to say that the feedback and conversation around it is necessary and a part of that process. I just think that my message would be to look at those publications as, hey, this is the initiation point at which the EPs have documented what they believe to be potentially a necessary change, and let's ask the questions why at that point, rather than feeling like oh, this is against the sentiment of the community, and it's a formal final change of some sort, because that's not the intention. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Carlos. Yeah, that makes sense. Totally. I think the point that I kind of agree with the most is that there's a need to engage with the community more in a
Yeah.
more informal way before things
Yeah.
are even formalized to the draft stage. I think that's
Yeah,
the key
we
takeaway.
got to figure out how to do totally. Yeah, that is the takeaway. I think we got to figure out how to do that while allowing like more sensitive kind of conversations to occur. Because like not all the information surrounding the foundation and Echelon should be a part of the public forum. There has to be some part of the nature, given the nature of what we're doing and how we're doing it. So I think that there is a need for some kind of great, more frequent cadence of less formal communication around topics that are being discussed, and we can figure out how to do that. I think cold. I know you mentioned, a lot of the kind of ways that Parallel practices this by just having regular community calls, so everyone kind of knows what we're thinking about, what we're working on, as much as humanly possible without releasing too much alpha. I think we could probably do that on the Echelon side as well.
Yeah, I'd also add, like, to your question about why aren't other EPs more vocal? I think just like people sort of get slotted into like comfortable roles. I think some of us really enjoy sort of chucking it up with you guys, but I think others are sort of more focused on their tasks, and so it just sort of became like a natural sort of I guess separation, perhaps of labor or perhaps of sort of tasks. But yeah, I would say that there are probably some that are more vocal for sure, but I think that that's just sort of came as a sort of process of how we were working.
Yeah,
I think
to add to that,
Cerebrus is like a great example of that. There's so much that he does behind the scenes, like absolutely a quarterback for the EPs in a lot of ways, and it's just not really his thing to hop on calls or do Twitter Spaces or anything like that. He's just laser focused on knocking shit off, um, getting shit done in the background.
yeah, I
And
think that's
so yeah,
also
there's
just
different personalities.
it's also just a natural function of how we divide work, right? I think like it's not. I would not read someone's lack of social engagement necessarily as their lack of doing something. I think there's a lot of folks who are just, fulfilling different functions so that myself, Cold, Meta, Sargent, Fall, and Ultra and others, can be more available. So I think everyone's just performing a different function is really how I'd interpret the lack of social interaction from some EPs, and that may be to their detriment in future reelection. I don't know, and I can't say whether or not that will impact it. But it doesn't. One thing I want to be clear about is it's not necessarily indicative that they're not doing something. That's for sure, because there's a lot of work going on.
No, I agree with that. I understand that. I think everybody will benefit from, like you said, maybe some kind of release of generally what everybody's doing, what has been achieved, I think, as you guys deem best in terms of what is shareable and not.
Yeah.
I will pause here, but finally I'll say one thing is that my intent is not to criticize any one person or individual. I love this community. I will be critical of the institution, as I think is my role and my job if I want if I want the community to thrive. But I will appreciate, and I'm sure that nobody takes it personally, but I apologize if anybody has been hurt by anything that I've said. I will pause here and I will make room for anybody else who wants to talk about this or Ardent Prime. If there's time, I'll talk again about the AP program. Thank you.
Yeah, your candor is appreciated, but I'm gonna have to recall my birthday party invitation. No, I think it's necessary. I think the first thing I said when you gave us a good kind of lay of the land from your perspective was that I know this comes from a place of protecting the foundation and the community and just everything we're doing. So I think everyone on the stage and everyone in the community knows that you're not coming at this out of a place of attacking, and no one feels that way. These are just good open conversations that are like, hey, is this the right way to go? And have you thought this through thoroughly? And I think if we don't have people in the community that question the decisions or at least the proposals even, we can really quickly find ourselves in a position where we're not making the best choices as a group. So
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to hop up? Just put your hand up and we'll invite you on stage.
One last thing I wanted to mention about this whole process we put in place whereby performance of each EP is made more transparent to the community. I think that's a good step. I'm always very cognizant of not wanting to create too much burden of work that is less productive for the ultimate objective of the foundation. The only thing I would say is I think a quarterly would probably be the best cadence for performance tracking, just because monthly it's almost, there's too much going on, too much work to do that's much more important than to make it a monthly occurrence. So I'd say my personal preference would be that it'd be quarterly.
I think too, maybe Nain, while you're still up here, because we talked a lot about communication and how that needs to improve, and we will look for ways to do just that in the near future. Can I ask what your opinion is in terms of like balancing this line between continuity and I guess decentralization? What would be your ideal scenario in terms of how the elections were conducted?
Thank you. I think I agree with the fact that continuity is important. I agree that we cannot kind of have a completely new batch every time. I agree with that. I think a minority council that is retained is a good idea, but I do think that some form of community check is still necessary. My concern with this amendment was primarily the change that said that they don't need a public election every 2 years. The removal of that condition was my concern. If that condition is tweaked, perhaps, or if we can reach a consensus on where the balance lies, I'm okay with that. I'm happy with that. I just want there to be some community involvement in everybody who's an EP. I just feel that way. Even if I was there, I would want the community to check me. I would want to know after every year whether I've done a good job, whether the community thinks that I've done a good job, whether they want me here or not. And also, I think the other concern that I had was that we haven't tried this yet. So there's not been a trial of this yet. Maybe after 2 years, we realize that it is better and there's more friction if we have an election for even the internally elected EPs, we could revisit it. But that's what I'm trying to say. I think there's this need to also take the community on board with these things and say, hey, so this is what we saw, this is what we're thinking, and this is the data we have from what we've learned, and this is what we want to implement. So maybe let's find a middle way. I think there needs to be more informal discussions and generally an attempt to convince the community a little bit as well. And like I said, we all love the community. We're all here. There is no way where I can imagine that if we all talk about it, that we can't reach a consensus. I think we should talk about it.
Totally. And I think in a lot of ways, actually, we're sort of witnessing maybe one of the pitfalls of saying things like just being open and saying things as you're thinking about them, because you've essentially sort of gotten to watch how our thinking on this election process has evolved over time. And it clearly we're not at the solution yet. Like what we presented in this bulletin ain't it. And so like a lot of people raise this idea based on this bulletin. It was like, well, the way I'm reading this, doesn't this mean that there could be a group of 3 EPs or 4 EPs that essentially go 11 years without getting voted in by the community once? And when you put it like that, it really does show kind of how ridiculous that sounds. So one idea, just throwing stuff at the wall here, that we were talking about, and we're happy to talk about more ideas here, was just this premise of we remove this concept of every other year the EPs who were internally elected are ineligible from the internal election, but instead, something like every 4 years, there is no internal election at all. So every single seat is up for grabs. And if it turns out that there's full turnover of all the EP seats, it kind of is what it is. Hopefully by year 4, there's enough processes and enough of a constitution in place that Echelon can survive and thrive, even with full turnover. And that probably wouldn't happen, right? But if it does, then maybe it's meant to be. So that could kind of be one potential solution for a check to the system there. How does something like that sound to you?
I think so. One thing I'll add here as well is I think as we learn and as this process is so new, I think that an aggressive change is better in the early stages so that we can learn more from it. So we have more data with it. We have a more diverse group of people coming in and coming out. As Rarity also pointed out in questions on the Echelon Discord, that I think there is a need to kind of explore more a diversity, like I said, of people, of representatives, and that can only be done if the whole election process and the turnover is faster. I think we can move towards a slower turnover over time, but I think the first few times, I believe it is better to be more aggressive with it so that we can just quickly learn, and then we have data to back any changes. Then we can say, okay, so over the last 2 or 3 turnovers, this is what we learned, this is what was lost, this is what was gained. Now we think, again, once again, if everybody agrees, let's stretch it to 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. Because 4 years is a lot of time. It's a very long time to try something, and I think it's not exactly efficient in my opinion.
So the concern is just the length of time. Like you would potentially be okay with a system like that if it were shorter, like 3 years or something.
Yeah, he wants
or
to
every
shorten the
other year?
cycle, right? The feedback cycle, so the duration is lesser, so the output of information is more frequent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be a better way, especially as we're learning. Once we've learned, I think we can. I'm okay if everybody has learned everything that is to be learned, and everybody agrees on it. I'm okay if there's an 11-year term, as long as that is what is needed and that's what everybody understands to be the best case.
Mhm.
But I think at this point, there's not enough information to make such aggressive changes. That is my concern.
Yeah, this is an iterative process, and we laid out a governance structure right with the initial foundation of this foundation, and let's just see it through at least one election, gather data, and then iterate as needed for the next election cycle. I think that's
Yeah,
a
leave it on the
fruitful way to
next. Yeah, like leave it on the next EPs to determine the performance of the existing throughput of not of the existing performance of the system post completion of the second election to assess essentially is that the feedback name?
Yeah. I think so. The EPs as well as the community, like I said, I think there is a need for there to be some performance evaluations, like you said, quarterly ones. I think that is sufficient. And I think also as part of EPs recampaigning, I think they should be allowed to share some information at least, because it would be sad in my view if there are EPs who are doing so good behind the scenes, but it's entirely unknown. And there is no way for the community to be able to vote for them without them saying anything about it. So I think there's a need for that. If there are people who are doing good work behind the scenes, they should be recognized. And the only way to do that is to have some form of evaluation.
Yeah, I think a year end for this term, like given that we want to implement quarterly going forward, I think for this year, we can probably just go with an annual kind of summary of achievements. And then going forward, we can always adjust as needed, right? So that there is some level of information disseminated prior to the subsequent election so that the community has that information to be able to make the determinations on their side. And then going forward, move to a more kind of interval-based system to place more social check on each of us throughout the duration of our term.
I think too, like the election process itself is something that we're going to be kind of cooking up here in the next in the coming weeks and months, and that's absolutely another topic that merits another open forum like this to discuss, because there are a lot of tweaks and features of that election I think we can make that allow for information to be properly disseminated and for people to get a vibe check on all the EPs. So I think that definitely ties into this conversation as well as how the election is run. And
One thing, yeah, one thing that's worth clarifying as well is I want to make just a general kind of sweeping statement. I think everyone contributed in a number of different ways based on their skill sets. I just think that what Echelon needs may be different in like every subsequent term, and I think we want to see to it that we understand, or anticipate as best as we can what the next term's needs would be now that we're all set up for the most part, and align the needs of in the coming term to the participants that we elect to fulfill those responsibilities, right? I think that's also a part of the conversation, is like what was needed in year one is very different than what's needed in year two, and so on and so forth. So I think we should probably try to as best as possible anticipate those needs and make them known so that we find the right people to fill them. But having said that, you really can't anticipate everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Well,
this
we have
this is part of the process, right? I think that's the good news. Warwick. Yeah. Oh, hey, Warwick.
Yeah.
yeah,
Can you guys hear me?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you.
I just wanted to ask you, and it's something that to think about, like, what is the biggest danger for if an EP gets voted out, like during a specific, like a sensitive project or something? What would be like the biggest danger to it? Is it something that you can quantify or that you can like estimate?
Yeah, I think. Well, go ahead, Fall.
Yeah, it really depends on what that project is. But for example, let's say we're setting up a legal structure for a particular program or partnership that we have going on, and only one or maybe two of the EPs is in contact with the legal agencies that are actually constructing this partnership. If these one or two EPs were to be voted out, that partnership could be delayed by months, if not canceled outright. So it really depends on the nature of it. And when it comes to software development, if only one or two of the EPs are involved in that particular process and they were to be removed, there's a chance that that product may not see the light of day or may miss its market timing in terms of a successful launch. So there are a number of things that we've been working on this year, and I foresee into the future where it would be very difficult if EPs could be removed immediately while they're in the middle of work.
Is
Yeah,
that something that we can counter? Like if the community is aware of it?
It's hard to counter it. Fundamentally, we try to have some level of redundancy where possible by more than one EP, being functioning. And like, this is not because someone doesn't do something. This is like, what if someone becomes unavailable for personal reasons, right? We want that, intra-term continuity as well. So typically we pair up into a group of 2 to 3 to tackle things, but there are some things that are very specific to some of the EPs as individuals based on their skill sets. Like I can tell you that Sargent is a much better analyst than I am, or Cold is much better, from a communication standpoint, or Fall is a great engineer, and Cerebrus is very well versed in legal structures. So and same with Bu. And so I think it really depends on what the item is, but we, to the best of our abilities, what we try to do is to add a little bit of redundancy intra-term to ensure that there would be some form of continuity, but we would nonetheless have some, growing pains if one of the people was unable to fulfill the responsibility.
I was more like thinking countering in the sense that the community elects them, right? Like if two guys or one EP or two EPs are like working on something sensitive, you guys make the community know about it, and then the community sort of elects them because they know it's very important to have them
Oh,
elected.
right. Okay, so yeah, so this is where I think this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier a bit. So I think the idea here is like, what do we anticipate the needs to be, right? And but maybe I think like if we needed something intra-term, and I'm not sure, I think that's the best way I can explain it, like before a term is up, I think that person would probably be best engaged as a consultant to like, not necessarily an EP if it's a very like specialized skill set, but if it's known in advance as, oh, okay, this is something we need, for the subsequent term, we can plan for it. But if we can't plan for it, I would assume that that person should just probably be engaged as a contractor or consultant to the foundation. Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like that the foundation has that flexibility if needed, but the best thing that can happen, the most positive outcome would be that we anticipated that need in advance of it occurring, and we have someone in place to handle that.
Because I think it also changes things. Like if you think about like some project that is going to take, like, say you estimate that it takes like 2-3 years, and it's a yearly ongoing voting for new people. It's like you may postpone that project because you don't know if you're going to be back, right?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I understood. I apologize.
Like I said, like you guys are 11 guys right now. Like if there's if a sort of something like a project that you think about that would be really cool for Echelon, like you want to do it, but you estimate that it takes like 2-3 years, and you don't know if you'll be back because there's going to be elections yearly, so
Right.
you might postpone it just because of that fact, right? And then you're going to be like hurting Echelon indirectly because you're not going to be doing that project because of that limitation.
Yeah, I don't think that would stop us if everyone in the community viewed it as a necessary initiative. I'd imagine that we would kind of have the foresight collectively to say, okay, this is not just a 1-year initiative, so either one of two cases should be met. Case one is we re-elect the same person so that person, and comes down to that continuity piece, that person can continue to do that because everyone views it as very important. Or two, we factor that into our decision to put somebody else in year 2 in place that can also see it through. I think that would be the two kind of cases that I could imagine as to how to handle that. I don't think it would inherently hurt us because I think pretty much everything we're doing is a multi-year initiative, right? Like Prime is a multi-year initiative when you think about it. So hopefully that answered your question, at least like somewhat coherently.
Yeah, I was more thinking like specific projects, like you talked about, like there were some EPs that were working on something very specific, and it was very alluring to
Sensitive.
their qualities as EPs, like their skill set, right?
Yeah, and that's where I think we should probably figure out how to communicate, like, because it, like, I don't think it should interrupt. Like, I do believe so this sounds really, maybe unpopular, but I think everyone's replaceable ultimately, like for the most part. And so, I think if one function was something, that someone was really a good fit for, I still think that we should be looking at that person as like, let the community in some capacity, validate it. But I think, yeah, like I just think like part of the process that could be adjusted to factor this in is again that pillar alignment at the time of reelection, which is like, what do the EPs believe in 2023 are the critical path items that we need to be very, very efficient and active with, and let's list those out. Maybe it's communication, maybe it's regulatory framework, maybe it's whatever these things are, and then those should stack up in theory to the people that are acting as kind of, or who are placed for continuity's sake back in. But if they're not, then we should be looking at that as a community and saying, okay, we need to fill these gaps. Who's going to do that? And we should be listening to the candidates and hearing whether or not we feel that they would be the person that could fill job X, Y, or Z. I don't know. Hopefully I'm answering your question. Maybe I'm not.
Yeah. I'm still like trying to make up my mind, like what would be the best as well, like to form an opinion about it. So that's why I'm like trying to ask pertinent questions about it.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one is, you know, again, this comes back to communication, but like, and during the close of a term, we should probably be saying what we believe to be, as EPs, what we believe to be the critical path items in the subsequent term, so that the community can have that lens when looking at new candidates, and then potentially protecting any necessary assets to the foundation that we believe to be critical to its success as well. So that kind of is that two-stage approach is like, if the community, you know, goes for a popular vote and picks the guy who's the most loud or the lady who's the most loud, great. But how do we ensure that nonetheless the foundation is successful in those cases? And I think the answer there is likely the continuity measure. But I do believe, you know, as I think someone said earlier, there should be some checks on that measure, and we want the frequency of the output of that measure to be accounted for and transparently kind of communicated as frequently as possible to make sure it's as efficient as possible. So I don't think anyone has the answer, right? I think the objective is clear. It's genuine interest in ensuring success, and you know, via these two levers or control methods that we as a collective, both EPs and community have, we can see to it that the foundation meets its objectives in the coming years. And we'll likely, I believe, we'll have to respond to inefficiencies in that system as they arise. I think it'd be naive of us to believe that it's perfect, even with any, you know, one or two more adjustments. I don't think we're there yet.
I have no more questions.
Do we want to talk a little bit more about Ardent Prime? Nain, do you, and I'm totally cool staying on the subject too. If other people had thoughts, we can come back to it as well. But that was the other big kind of glaring item, I think, that drew a lot of attention from the bulletin. So Nain, I know you had some thoughts on that. Feel free.
Yeah. Thank you. Sure. I'll talk about it, and then if anybody else wants to jump in, please let me know as well. So there's been a lot of back and forth on this as well. I will not get into many of the arguments again. Thank you for listening to them, though, and thank you for being patient with them. So I come into this with a bias, so I will declare that. I will probably be speaking for the minority, because generally, you know, the larger community is probably going to be happy that everybody is ardent, and there are two tiers. But I do think that there is an argument for more exclusivity. I understand the EP's reasoning in the sense that, you know, so it should be more inclusive, not gameable. Meta said that it's more about, it's so rich people can't just come and win. I agree with all of those things, but I do have a disagreement with the new structure, and I don't think that the old structure precluded these things. I think it was well within line with these aims, and I don't think there was any need to change that. So I understand the details were vague, but I think it is fairly certain that the quantity of EADs and the time held were two things that were quite evident, unless we change it now. But I think that I don't think there was a lot of vagueness around that. I think the quantity was a key factor. I read from the update, for example, I think it said that a new program is being developed to reward the most passionate and steadfast collectors. It also said that every EADA will be treated equally, so FEs and masterpieces are the same. So there's emphasis on, you know, not the rarity of the card and potentially the quantity of the EADs you hold over time. So time is the dictating factor here. So that precludes anybody who's just coming in, for example, on pack drop 6 and buying 5,000 cards. If the blockchain shows that the time they've held those cards is like 1 month compared to somebody who has, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 cards for 6 months, that guy clearly wins. So I think that is something that is not gameable at this point anyways. And I think we've all seen the chain. I have not noticed, at least in the last few months, that somebody's come in and bought 5,000 cards all at once. I don't think that has happened. I don't think that is a concern at this point, at least. And if it was, like I said, if it did happen in PD6, I'm sure that the time factor would preclude that guy from being top tier, or at least the first tier. As for riches, I don't think that, once again, that having a number of cards necessarily meant that you had to have a lot of money. I think a lot of us hustled for those cards, traded for those cards. A lot of them were from a lot of packs that we bought. I don't think that the existing structure that was there before, the 5 tiers, I don't think that that promoted or rewarded people who are rich necessarily. I know a lot of people who save money every week to buy a few extra cards. And also, if we talk about the subjective nature of collecting, the 2 words used are ardent and passionate. And passion can be subjective. I understand that. But if you look at the blockchain, and courtesy Zero shared his numbers with me as well. So if we rank the wallets with number of cards, the person who ranks around 500 has less than 50 cards. Less than 200 cards. I think that person has 160 or 170 cards just by number of cards alone. Let's discount time for now. But if you add time, it doesn't make a big difference here, because, like I said, there has not been, in recent history at least, I have not seen on the chain that somebody's come in and bought like 1,000 of cards in just one day or 1 week or the last month or so. So if we look at the 500th person, he has, let's say, 180 cards. We look at the 2500th person, and that person has 46 or 48 cards, right? And if now there are people who have, let's say, 1,000 cards, I think we do have a scale here of where we can see the indication of the level of passion. We cannot define passion per se, but there's a scale here. There's a difference of 2,000% in terms of passion. We can discount it by time, but that 2,000% will not come down to 10%. It will not come down to 50%, even if we add other factors to it. I mean, I think that difference is significant enough to merit that person who has shown that he was more ardent, or he or she was more ardent and more passionate, deserves a title that is equally, like I said, commensurate with that passion. I think having 2 titles clearly just removes that entirely from the equation. I think the 5 tiers were fine. To me personally, it is my opinion that the change seems more like a compromise than an improvement. I think it may have been driven by, let's say, lack of sufficient rewards for everybody. I don't know, it's my opinion. I'm just saying it out now so that we can address that as well. If it is due to lack of sufficient rewards, I understand that. I'm not going to argue that too much, and I'm not going to merely complain. I have suggested solutions. So for example, if card backs cannot be designed for everybody, we can have SE and FE card backs. There's precedent for that. The orbs are SE and FE as well. We can do that. We can split those. And we don't have to give everybody the key, for example. The key can have, I'm not even going to argue about the function of the key. So I'm not going to blame the communication. I understand if there is a place where the key, for example, adds to imbalance with other keys. I will, however, say that perhaps there should have been better internal communication and understanding. But like I said, I will not blame that. I understand that that can happen, and I'm not going to kind of, hammer that really. I don't want to. I think it's fine if the game balances is affected by a key. I understand that. But the key function, which is the out of game function, the beta access, I think that could have perhaps have had more exclusivity. Perhaps, the people who have the key have instant access, and without the key, you probably have to wait, I don't know, 2 weeks or something. I'm not sure. But I'm okay with the key not having an in-game function. It's disappointing, but I'm not going to argue for that. I'm fine with that, like I said. But I do think that the titles are very important, and the rewards can be split. The card backs can be SCFE, but I think the titles are the key point here. The titles are what we want to earn. There's no dollar value to them. I don't think if anybody in the community thinks it's about flipping them or selling them, or we're unhappy with the value of those rewards, I don't think that is the case. I don't think that the minority that I speak for believes that. I think what we want is more exclusivity. I think what we want is better titles to indicate that. So an increase in the number of tiers, and potentially more the split of rewards. And like I said, maybe an SCFE version of the card back. I think would make people happy. As for the key, I think I will let you guys find that balance with that. I will not speak for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing all of that around the Ardent Prime program. The program was originally created before the manifest existed, and the intention of the Ardent Prime program was to more or less do what the manifest has done. So I think we have a phenomenal opportunity here to pivot the original intention of the Ardent Prime program to better fit what the community has grown to, what you guys have sort of imagined this program to become. Of all the things that you mentioned, I personally, I'm quite in favor of the idea of SE versions of the same art assets, and then in addition to that, a more granularity in terms of titles. One thing that I do have to push back a bit on is the key. Keys are a very involved design process from both Echelon and Parallel side. They tie into metagame balance. They tie into prime emissions. They tie into a lot of different systems. And creating a new key is it's a very large undertaking. So what I'm wondering is a key an absolute must? Or is there a way for us to be able to lean on beta access as an asset that looks like a key? Look, it's not a perfect solution, but I'm trying to find the middle ground for this one particular point.
As I said, I will not argue for a key because I understand. I think balance in the game is more important to me, and I think everybody else also, as opposed to just a key that potentially breaks it. But I can only speak for myself in this. I would be okay giving up a key, like I said, if the tiers are exclusive enough and there's something else that is, the point is to, kind of make up for it a little bit. I think I'd be okay with that. I don't think that a key is something that it's not a hill that I'm going to die on. Not
Yeah,
today.
I've had some conversations around this program, with a number of the EPs recently, and I was, for the most part, probably I should have been maybe more involved in it. I think there's actually a couple problems with this program. When you think about the separation of let's say church and state, in that some of the rewards are actually being manufactured by Parallel versus being an Echelon specific reward. There's all kinds of stuff here. I do think that there's an opportunity to think a bit more and take it away around how Echelon can issue something based on its resources and its assets being Echelon specific versus Parallel related. I think Parallel can, ensure titles, but I think we should take a key off the table. I think that there's probably something we can do, and I've kind of started to talk about a number of different ideas with some of the EPs. My personal preference is I think that we should probably take away the feedback in general around the program and take a deeper look at it, given the fact that Manifest now exists, and adjust accordingly to ideally have it such that Echelon issues a reward rather than it being dependent upon any one game, be it Parallel or any other. And I think Echelon does have certain things it can work with, and I've kind of communicated this to some of the EPs again. But I think the objective, in saying all this is I think there's probably a little bit more work to do here to get this part right and to do it in a way that I would feel meets the standard of either Parallel or Echelon. And so we can either do this kind of one of two ways. Option one is we just kind of agree to some simple change that satisfies, the remediates any concerns and moves us forward. Or kind of item path two is think about it, a little bit more deeply and come back with some, more material kind of path that kind of opens up a new channel for Echelon to do something like this in the future and more consistently. I prefer path two rather than a short-term kind of one-time quick fix, but that's because I like to anticipate that the future is bright and we may have circumstances like this with Parallel and or subsequent games in the future again. So I'd rather set up a strong structure that allow, and maybe net new ideas that kind of put it in a better spot going forward. I don't know where the other EPs stand on this, but this is just my personal preference. Does that make
Yeah.
sense what I'm saying? Kind of like, do we want to like fix something that we feel like maybe not perfect, or do we want to actually go a bit deeper and, you know, build a system here that can be reused multiple times in the future?
Yeah, I think maybe just in terms of exploring that first option, just like the simple change, maybe I can let Meta have the floor. He had a proposal on how to do a small tweak. My view on the sort of going back to the drawing board, kind of starting from square one, is that um, the, as Echelon evolves and as the future becomes brighter, like I absolutely think there are cool things that we can do and come up with along the way. Um, my view is that those don't necessarily need to be called Ardent Prime, that it can be something else. So my view would kind of be like, hey, let's make the tweaks that we need to get this thing out the door in a way that everybody is agreeable to everyone, and then we can get creative and go back to the drawing board for the long term and continue to try to come up with cool ideas. Just because, yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, I sort of like that as well. Cool. Like I think that the things that we were throwing around within the call with Kills, I think that they're really exciting. I just I think that yeah, we can separate those and really sort of take our time with them and sort of come up with a really good way to sort of share that out. I think in terms of like how do we sort of address the I guess the immediate feedback? I think what I gathered was that we just wanted a bit more striation in terms of in terms of the titles. So one option that I sort of was kicking around within the general within the general chat with the EPs was essentially a 3-tier system. So we had over flattened, and maybe we sort of introduced like a 3-tier system whereby I think I think the numbers were 100, 400, and 2000. And you know, they would come with the appropriate titles there, and sort of I think taking Nate's suggestion of introducing an FE and SE version of the card backs, but essentially just sort of working with what we have. And I think I agree, like the title itself is the thing that will be, when we look back in 5 years, the thing that sort of is the most precious. You know, I think when you know, we have this bright community of 2,000 playing against, you know, tens to maybe 100,000 people, like, you know, queuing up against an Ardent Prime should be a rare occurrence.
Millions.
Okay, all right. I didn't. I didn't.
That's the goal, right?
Absolutely. I'm just conservative in nature. But yeah. So that was sort of like our a sort of a framework that we were kicking around there. So 1,400. Sorry, I'm sorry. 100.
I just
400,
posted
and
it
2,000.
in voice
Oh, you did?
text, the breakdown, just so people can look at it. It might be easier to look at it that way. Again, disclaimer, just proposal, draft,
Yeah.
etc. But yeah, it's over there in voice text now. The three-tier version.
Now that I've opened Pandora's box, they're going to be like, but what's Kalos's solution to this, right? Like, I think ultimately, if the Ardent Prime's path is the way, you know, the existing adjustment Ardent Prime path is the way we want to go, that, you know, I trust and defer to the EPs. I did propose something that's pretty interesting. I think ultimately we want to develop that, but it's not, it doesn't necessarily, it can be inclusive of Ardent Primes in the future anyways. So we can always get there when we get there. But you guys are watching the mess of our process in real time. So
Seeing some comments that the names are not the greatest. The first order, second order, third order. The names themselves and the titles that they correspond to, definitely open for feedback. If you have some cool name ideas for the 3 tiers, let's hear them.
We've also got Pavel on stage. Do you want to take the floor, Pavel?
Hello, everyone. How are we doing? I came up. I don't think anybody would be surprised that I would disagree a little bit with my best friend Nan here, but I actually like the flattening. I think something to consider is that if you have 2,500 people that are in this sort of 2-tiered system in the future, and I'm going to speak in terms of parallel more than the Echelon ecosystem, simply for the fact that it's the only game in the ecosystem, even if the Ardent Prime program is more of an Echelon thing. But so let's say you just have parallel. That Parallel is going to need a gigantic player base to be successful over the long term. Just when we talk about exclusivity and granularity, being anywhere in that 2,500 is going to put you in the top, the 1% of the top 1%, assuming the game is successful long term. And I think some things to consider are, it is really hard to judge, passion and what it means to be ardent. And you have somebody like me who I was the 13th person to register for Parallel's presale. I've been around for 2 years now, but it's entirely possible that just from that alone, I might have some time wait for my ranking. But what if somebody came in 6 months ago and is actually 10 times the fan that I am, and they've busted their ass and done everything they can to buy every card, and they scrape every penny, and they participate in every community thing, and they really work to their way to try to get into that point. Whereas the more granularity you have more somebody more like me I could just sit on my butt and probably get a pretty high rank if there's a whole bunch of rank systems versus the person that's coming in and hustling. And I kind of like it that you have this 500, maybe like first tier spread, because you do have, we deal with NFTs, right? And that it's wider to the crypto space than just being a trading card game. So there are wallets that belong to, frankly, giga whales. Even some people I know that kind of came in, bought a bunch of stuff in the beginning, and they haven't bought anything else since then. And they don't really participate in the community. And they're not like bad people, but speculation happened. And unless you're going to introduce like an activity component, which is kind of hard to also quantify, you can put a granular multi-tiered system in, and then that top, say, 2 or 3 slots out of a 5-slot Ardent Prime system, that could be filled with people that aren't great. You gave them the titles, but are they active community members? Were they just speculators that came in, cornered the market early on? They have huge wallets, but now they've just, they're gone. Just waiting for the Prime to come out and the game to be successful. So I think the flattening is kind of better, because you're trying to encompass the depth and breadth of people that actually have been around. They're active, they're supporters, they participate in pack drops, they do whatever, maybe they help out the Galaxy Key puzzle, they're active in Discord, they do the community contests and all these things, because what it boils down to is, as of right now, Parallel kind of is the Echelon ecosystem until we get more games. So that's the metric that we have to measure is, if somebody's really like a top tier community member, there's a lot of ways for that to be. And I think that, there is wiggle room here to not try to, take one specific metric per se, or even 1 or 2 specific metrics, and kind of block somebody out of getting that, like, that highest kind of tier, recognition as a collector or community member, that might necessarily not be somebody like me, for example, who's been around for a long time, but maybe there's like far better people. So I think I would say ultimately that the more granularity you have, the more tiers you have, you're just kind of taking less away from the people that actually have that passion drive, and the flattening of it. You're lumping more people into a singular category, but it also opens the door for the people that kind of have that hustle, that wanted to do it, and it still doesn't take away from anything of a person who maybe they do have 1,000 cards and they've been around for a long time, because you're still in that exclusive 1% of 1% when the game has 2.5 million active players every month. 3 years from now, you'll still be incredibly exclusive to have even any Ardent Prime title.
Sorry, I just want to check if there's.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead, Neil.
No, I'm just going to check if I have time to add to this, or if there's a shorter time.
No, you're okay. Go ahead. We got time.
Thank you. Yeah. So thank you, Pavel. I love you, but I addressed most of these when I started. My point, I addressed most of these concerns. I agree with you that passionate community members should be rewarded. I have suggested in the past as well for there to be a program for that. I am a passionate community member. I am in all activities. I do everything first. You know that. But I'm not asking for a reward for that today, because, like I said, this program was said it's about passionate and steadfast collectors of Echelon approved digital assets. So for as much as I would want every passionate community member to be rewarded, and I want that, I think everybody should get a card back or something. I think this is not the program for this. And I think that the initial communication, because it was said, and you defined literally what I've done. I have been here, I've come in and I've started collecting, I've started hustling, I've started saving money to buy all these cards. So you're defining me. And I'm just simply saying that I want to be acknowledged for that if I end up in that tier. And I'm hoping, and after looking at the chain, I'm hoping that somebody who has 50 cards from PS 1.5 cannot really compete with somebody who's collected 1,000 cards over the last 6 months. I'm hoping that the 1,000 card guy wins over somebody who even buys 1,000 cards in 1 month. I'm hoping that guy wins. I'm rooting for that guy. And I know that like I said, I'm speaking for a minority because there's a handful of people. If you look at the chain, the difference between the top collectors in terms of cards and the 25th person or 500th person or even 250th person is huge. So even if there are Giga wallets, I don't think anybody other than, let's say, the Paragon DAO wallet, I think nobody else has more than 5,000 cards. I think even that wallet has like 6,000 or something. But if you look at the chain, I think if you have a tier of 100, even if 5 whales sneak into that, I'm okay with it as long as the other 95 are people who are active and have hustled over the last few months. I think they deserve that. I think the flattening it's a very, very flat. It's a very, very flat structure. I think it does not sufficiently reward somebody who's worked really hard over the last few months to do what is exactly stated in the Echelon update, being a passionate and steadfast collector of Echelon approved digital assets. So unless we change that, I think I fully advocate for a new program to reward all passionate community members. I've been advocating for it internally as well so many times. I think, like I said, I'll say it again. I think everybody who shows up here, especially in the bear market, should be rewarded. I will say that. I will fight for it another day, maybe if it comes to it. But today it's about this.
We're chatting in the voice text chat there, and I just want to thank Pavel for coming up and sort of saying his thoughts, and thank Naim for sharing his. I think 3 tiers is a good compromise from being too flat and too too layered. Yeah, I'm hoping that that sort of, I think others may share the same thought there. Yeah, I'm hoping that that's a reasonable compromise between the two. But I appreciate both of your comments.
Seems like the biggest point of debate now is the names. We definitely need cool names if you're going to be rocking it until the end of time playing parallel.
Also, one point to the number of players, I agree with it 100%. I want us to have millions of players, tens of millions of people coming in, but I want the ardent people to be one of the 1% because they were here when they weren't there, and I think that because we expect tens of millions of people, I would not be happy diluting my rank for them. They weren't here. Yeah.
I want to talk about the names, but I don't want to change the subject if you guys are still talking about something else.
I think you can go ahead for.
I think you're good. Yeah, go for it.
Like, do you guys have any lore that you thought about surrounding Echelon? Like, we've seen some cards relating to Echelon, so I'm sure you guys are developing some lore surrounding it, right?
There
Yes.
is some lore. Yeah, there is some lore being developed by Parallel around Echelon. Yes, but whether or not it stacks up in time is the question, right? Like, I mean, it's a matter of timing is the issue on that front. Because does Parallel have that completed in line or prior to the completion of the reward program is yet to be debated, or yet to be seen. Excuse me. I'd have to check with our writing team to see where we're at with that. See if it does stack up. I'm really not sure. I don't believe it does though.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it just needs to be. It could be something general. It doesn't have to be something like that binds the story. Just because we have this program, it binds the story to us, right? Like to this titles. It could be just something general that doesn't influence the story whatsoever, but it is part of it, which makes it cool.
Yeah, totally. I can take it away and ask Greg on our team, on the our team being the Parallel side, to see where he's at and see if we can fast track it and see if we can use it to influence. Because I don't think it'll be as impactful. Like if we were able to integrate it and front run it a bit on the narrative side, so that we can issue something we plan to use later. That's ideal, right? Because then we're in a spot where we know what we're going to do with it in the future on the Parallel side, and that way there's the mystique of it gets further perpetuated in other forms of material that Parallel creates, rather than it just being its own standalone Echelon issued name, right? That's kind of what you're alluding to, I believe.
Yeah, like I'm alluding to something that is relating to the Echelon lore to be the names of the tiers of Arden Prime. But does that implicate that the lore gets disclosed earlier?
It wouldn't. No, we could probably do it in a way that
Yeah, that's what
that wouldn't give away our story that we're going to be telling. But
yeah,
I'm just trying. I have to figure out if we can get commitment from the writing team on those names prior to, right? Because essentially what we'd be asking them is to jump for a moment over to the future of things, because I know where they've slated the involvement of Echelon as a cartel in the narrative, but we're not on that piece yet. We're working on the other pieces, and we do plan on being at a cadence of 4 to 6 comics a year. So we will get there pretty quick, but it's still an ask to them to say, can you just jump briefly with us to getting this part done so that we can use that within the Echelon reward side. So let me take that away. I think it's an interesting thought. I never thought of it, to be very frank with you.
I think another way to go about it is to come up with a temporary name, like sort of like put it a sort of a mystique or like suspense around it, like call it like secret society of something, and then down the line you can adapt to the story that you guys think about for the Echelon lore.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the problem. So this is where the problem occurs. Like just putting my Parallel and Echelon hat on, it's like what we want to ultimately get away from, and this is just speaking super transparently and openly, is this idea that every time Echelon does something, that Parallel is responsible for production of that thing, be it from an art asset or creative standpoint. I think ultimately we want to get to a spot where they can evolve together, but not with a dependency on Parallel from a production standpoint, because it ends up pushing things around from a work schedule for us being Parallel. But yeah, let me take it away. I think what you're saying is relatively low lift. Like the required energy is probably low. All I'd have to do is just have a chat with the writing team about maybe just front running a bit on the naming of certain things that we can commit to, and then relay that back to the EPs.
There's also already been a lot of chat today, like just now in voice text about potential names. So there's also another scenario where somebody comes up with a badass name, and
So
everybody's
this
cool
is where
with
it gets weird though, right? Because this is where it gets weird. So like the one concern we would have from a Parallel standpoint always is, and not to in any capacity take the creativity away from the community, but we always want to be very protective of not diluting the game itself with like some arbitrary name that is created. You know what I mean? So as long as that name is in the realm, because this will be presented in the game client, right? And so as long as that name doesn't is not, I'm just gonna make up a silly like Ice Cream Masters or something like that, where, and please don't suggest Ice Cream Masters and vote for it. But the idea is that as long as it doesn't dilute the game client as something that seems to be so arbitrary and so outside of the scope of what the game client is, that it breaks that kind of continuity. We always have to be cognizant of that, because we want it to feel very, very tight, very holistic, and not have that strange interrupt. So as long as the thoughts and creative ideas being presented by the community are in that vein, I think we're going to be okay. And now that I've said Ice Cream Masters, I know that's what everyone's going to push for.
I actually think that's a really good name.
I think that would be hilarious.
Ice Cream Masters.
Like that's why I thought about putting it like secret, like making it a generic name, or like a secret names, and that you could change after, right?
You want us to
have,
issue redacted names?
for example, like something like that. I don't know. I'm just trying to
No,
brainstorm.
it's an interesting idea. You're not wrong. They're like, essentially it's a placeholder, right? But I don't love that either, because it feels so like half baked. So let me take it away and work with both Parallel and EPs on it and see where we land. I'm sure we can find something that's really meaningful. And I think both viewpoints of Pavel and Nain are completely valid. I think the EPs have heard it, and we'll take it away and make sure that we find some satisfying resolve. Is it Nain or Nyan? Nain?
No, you have it right. Nain. Yeah.
Nain. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
Sounds fair to me. I know that there will be people upset about the key, but like I said, I think it's a good compromise. I think the keys should be off the table. Understanding what we understand now.
Yeah, the keys from a mission standpoint, like I think fall won't sleep for another couple of months if we have to introduce another modifier on the emission schedule, and like we're just too close to delivery and being in a state where we're past kind of falsified data testing, because we're going to be moving to production data testing, right? Like we've been testing with non-player data for some time, and I think we really need to get to in alpha in the background at minimum production testing the emissions with keys. So introducing something like that now would really set us back, and I appreciate if everyone could we can always do that, something like that later potentially, but I think let's make sure that the existing as contemplated system functions as intended prior to introducing additional variables.
No, I agree with that. I agree. And also from my perspective, thank you so much for being a patient and receptive audience. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
You gave us a good shellacking. If you didn't, I'd be disappointed.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I think, again, everybody is welcome to put your hand up. You have another question. on our end, next steps here are probably to go back to the drawing board a bit and integrate some of the feedback from today's call into a bulletin 2202 V2 of some sort, and publish that maybe this week. And again, it won't be final. We'll see if the types of changes we suggest are agreeable based on the feedback. And then if they are, we can proceed. And if it ends up being our prime, or depending on how these discussions go, in terms of naming and stuff, maybe we would have a placeholder just for the purposes of moving it forward, or kind of have those names set in stone. But yeah, that's next step for us. And then I also just wanted to draw everybody's attention to the fact that there's 2 events now up at the sidebar there. I just scheduled the next event, which is that community call on Wednesday for discussing Prime Unlock. So that'll be a good one. Come ready with your questions and thoughts on that. Lots of exciting things to get into there. I don't see any other hands up.
I just add something.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I don't want to put any pressure, but I think a really badass name will make up for the key. But no pressure.
Ice Cream Masters it is.
Pressure's on you, Warwick. We need the name.
Dude, I have no idea about the lore. Like, I know nothing. So, like, I can make up some stuff, but it's hard.
Well, we'll try to get our creative
It'll be something for the
people to
community
work.
to think about, yeah.
Anything else from anybody up on stage? Closing thoughts, things to say before we wrap up here? Been going for a little
That's
over
it.
an hour and a half.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. And I think that's it, right? Is there any other topics we need to cover, or we got it all?
Yeah, I think we got it. Again, feel free to holler at us in the Discord with other questions. Don't forget to click interested on the event for Wednesday. And I guess, yeah, we'll be talking to you all very soon.
Thank you, everybody. And see you on Wednesday.